Hello, my name is Eamonn Butler and I'm director of the Adam Smith Institute, which is a free market think tank. And this is one of our series of webinars which we do every week. This format today is a little unusual. We have an interview with a very interesting man, Joe Foster, who is the founder of Reebok, which he turned from a startup into the world's #1 shoe brand. And he's written about it in a book, which is now available, you know where, and it's called Shoemaker, rather modestly. But he says that my story, the Reebok story, is not a standard business tale of how I worked hard, hunched over a shoe last for 35 years, nor is it a tale of how I risked millions and came out smelling of shiny leather. It's a book about motivation and the importance of gripping onto an opportunity when Lady Luck presents it. And there's more to it than that, a lot more. And indeed there is. It's a very interesting book. And I'm going to chat to Joe. And after a few minutes, I'm going to also be joined by Philip Salter, who's the founder of the Entrepreneurs Network, which is a think tank that aims to make Britain the best place to do business, especially if you're a small and growing enterprise. So he will perhaps comment on Joe's story and to give us some insights about how he sees the story with respect to the other entrepreneurs that he deals with all the time. So Joe, welcome. It's very good to see you.
Thank you, Eamonn. Thank you for the invitation.
Not at all. And it took you 31 years to take Reebok from being a startup in Bolton to the world's #1 with a £3 billion turnover. Did you have sort of high ambitions to do that when you started? And did things turn out remotely like you expected they would?
Well, I think you probably understand that being an entrepreneur, you have to go where the business is and you have to move with the business. We didn't have any limits when we started, and progression was slow, step by step. We could dream big, and dreaming big is one thing, but we had to win those small pieces step at a time. And so we're just keep focused on the day. And if we kept that focus, it's fine. But apart from liking the idea of being #1, how to get there depended upon seizing the opportunities. And that was as they arose. Some were sort of near disasters, but others would propel us to that #1 position. So I guess we had more good luck than bad luck.
Your grandfather started making spiked running shoes in the early 1900s or late 1800s. And soon all of the great runners, Harold Abrahams, Eric Liddell, all the others, were wearing his shoes. Was your grandfather an inspiration that you could do the same and have the same kind of, make the same sort of achievements and have the same success?
Well, yes, he was. And I think we learned more about grandfather after we had left the company rather than whilst we were working with the company. The thing is that he was a genius. And I guess many families go through what the J.W. Foster experienced. Yes, in the 1920s, that was the belle epoque for Fosters. Many gold medals. And as we say, we had Harold Abrahams and Eric Liddell. And they, of course, were in Chariots of Fire. They were immortalized in that film. And that's good. But the problem is that grandfather's business was being destroyed by his sons. And this we only found out after coming out of national service when we were able to look around and view the company. But Jeff and I couldn't let it die. We couldn't let his legacy die because it was a tremendous legacy that he'd left us. And if we hadn't started, or if we hadn't taken the decision to start our own company, I think it was most certainly have died.
And so you mentioned national service, and like all young men of the time, you did, I guess, 2 years of national service. That was sort of made or broke quite a number of people. What did you learn from that? Did it change the way that you looked at the world? Did it make you more ambitious or see more opportunities?
Well, it certainly did, because prior to going into national service, of course, you're part of a family. Mother looks after you, makes your meals. You get up in the morning, you go and you do the usual things. Having spent 17, well, 18 years going to wherever you enjoyed your social pleasures, you used to be the church. And then, of course, as you grew up a bit more, you went down to the centre of town and went to the local dance halls. But when you went to national service, and I think one of the good things was that we'd both been in the Scout organisation. And so we were used to going out, doing things, roughing it. So going into the international service, yes, you did sort of get a sudden shock. You weren't able to go home at night. You were there, you were doing it. But you did learn a lot. And the best thing was to learn. I mean, I used to play badminton, fairly good standard. So I managed to get myself in the fighter command badminton team. So half of my national service I spent playing badminton, and that was very good, very enjoyable. But yes, when we came back, of course, from doing that, the lessons we learned, we were not frightened then to speak to father and uncle who were then running the business. And ultimately, of course, we made that decision to leave and set up Reebok.
Your father and his brother, who you mentioned, took over your grandfather's shoe business, yeah. And then you, for a time, worked in the factory. Was it always assumed that you would work in the factory, or did you have other ambitions, or did your family have other ambitions for you?
Well, I mean, I don't know. When you're young, you don't really think much about the future. You're just enjoying the present. So you're doing whatever, going, finding the girls and doing whatever you're doing. So, and I spent some time in Bolton Technical College engineering department until I was 17. So I was, you can say I could have been an engineer. In fact, we were offered positions at de Havilland, which was local to Bolton. I think they made the propellers at the time. But I obviously didn't take that. And so I came into the family business when I was 17, but I only spent 1 year there before national service. So I came in 1952. In 1953 to 1955, I was doing national service.
Many entrepreneurs, I think probably Philip will tell us this later, but many entrepreneurs learn their craft from working in their parents' businesses. You worked in the factory for only a year, and then you took a shoemaking course. It seems odd that you had to take a shoemaking course when you worked in a shoe factory. Can you explain that?
Well, yes, but we must understand we were a very specialized shoe manufacturer. And whilst in terms of making shoes, we were in the shoe business, we sold our shoes into the sports business. I would think that most shoe manufacturers sell within shoe stores and whatever, but we were in a different business. However, since we were in a different business, we only learned one part of making shoes, and that was how to make running shoes. And we thought we needed to know more about the business, about materials. So we went to Rossendale College. We went there for 2 years at night. We did this at night, of course. They father wouldn't let us off during the day at all. There's no such thing. No, if you want to spend your money, go do it at night or your time, whatever it is. So we went and we learned the latest skills, because the Foster skills were quite old and quite limited. So the new manufacturing, plus we learned about materials and we learned about suppliers. And we also made an awful lot of contacts, and they would become very useful to Reebok as a startup.
And you started up Reebok with a loan from the bank and loans from relatives, and you sold your home in order to help start it, and you basically lived in the factory. Now, was that scary or was it exciting?
Well, we were young. We were sort of indestructible. We'd spent 2 years away from the family, and we spent 3 years back in the factory trying to get the family to understand that we needed to plan, we needed a future. And I said to my father, look, we need to do this, we need to move forward. And all he could say is, look, when I'm gone and Bill's gone, he said, it'll be yours. And I said, Dad, the problem is we don't want you to go, but this business will not be here by the time you do go, and we need to move now. But they wouldn't change. Nothing could happen. So we took that plunge. And no, after the frustrations we'd experienced, it was just exciting to be able to sort of follow a dream, if you will. And like we say, we're indestructible. What can go wrong?
Striking out on your own. One of the interesting points that comes out of the book is that you were a bit of a runner yourself, and one of the aspects of your early development of Reebok was that you recruited runners as sales agents. How important was it to have sales agents who actually sort of understood and were thrilled by the product, rather than people who were just off the street who would represent anybody? Was that an important thing in? I
think it was more of a necessity than anything else. Because I used to call on sports shops, and they didn't want a product they had to sell. You know, I was told very politely by quite a few of them, look, I've got Adidas, I've got Dunlop. Why do I need Reebok? Well, that was the question. And I had to make them need Reebok. And since I couldn't get them to take Reebok into their stores, I had to find a way. And I found a way by, well, we were involved a lot with athletics and athletes. And the 3A's handbook was very useful, because in the 3A's handbook was every club that was affiliated to the 3A's. And in that handbook was the name and address of every secretary of every club. So it seemed if I was to go anywhere, I needed to contact these clubs. So it was letters out to every secretary. And we offered a 15% discount. They could either give it to the club for club funds, or one of the members of the club could act as our agent. And we got a lot of agents. And that eventually led to sports shops calling me and saying, look, there are athletes that want your shoes. They keep calling into our shop about Reebok shoes. And, you know, but we believe you're selling them direct. And if you stop doing that, we'll stock your shoes. So I said, no, I won't stop doing that. But I don't sell them at discount prices, and I'll give you normal wholesale prices. And if you do stock our shoes, I'll tell everybody who comes on to me that you can get them locally. And the advantage was, of course, fit. That would be the big advantage. And eventually this led to having full distribution in the UK.
So Dunlop, Adidas, they were all sort of going strong even before you had tooled up almost, is that right?
Oh, yes, yes, indeed.
It must have been rather daunting to take on what are now very famous names. I don't know what they were then.
There was still, well, quite famous names. Yes, the biggest problem is that during grandfather's days, he supplied about 96 football teams with training shoes and football boots. You can hardly name one of the clubs that's playing today that he didn't supply direct. But by the time we were able to move away from the Foster family, there was no trade with football clubs. I tell a lie there, because I do remember in my early days at Foster's sending training shoes down to Tottenham Hotspur. I do remember that, personally. But basically that trade had gone. And for us to try to get into the football business, that was a big ask. We didn't have the money. We didn't have the machinery. We had to concentrate really on something that we knew about and a business that we thought we could grow in, and that was running and athletics.
And you say in the book, it did surprise me that when you started, you were already thinking of overseas markets when you started up Reebok. Weren't you content just to be the best in Britain? I mean, going overseas is a pretty big step. You really thought about that just right at the beginning?
Well, funnily enough, J. Edward Foster's, they had a distributor in the USA, and that was, they were Frank Bryan and Bob G and Jack, who you won't know, but they were head coaches at Yale University. And they were supplying Yale, or Yale, right, say buying off Foster's, so that they could distribute them amongst the universities and colleges in the USA. And so I knew that there was a market out there in athletics that went all the way through the college system and the university system, a big market. So I thought if we could get that market, we should try. But it was 1968 and we started our business in 1958. It was 1968 before I had the first opportunity to go to America. And that was to the NSGA show, the National Sporting Goods Association, America. And it was in Chicago, hellishly cold. It was really cold to go. But the government, they had the plans and they wanted people to export. And in the sports trade, they said what we will do is we will pay for a stand at the NSGA show. We will pay your return airfare, and we'll pay 50% of your hotel bills whilst you're out there. Wow. Seemed to me it was cheaper to go out there than to live at home. So that decision wasn't difficult to go and take.
But you had an awful lot of setbacks trying to get into the American market. One thing after another just didn't quite work out as you'd hoped, and yet you still kept going. Why was America so important to you? Was it the potential earnings or just the desire to be number one and a world player?
Well, in those days, the athletics market in the UK was quite small. And if we were to grow, we needed to get into a big market, and that America was a big market. And if we could make that, we would probably be in a chance to expand with the big boys. Plus the fact the running boom in America started in the early 70s. Well, it started late 60s, and we knew this was happening. With the running boom, whilst it didn't come across to the UK, it was really growing with the help of Runner's World. Runner's World was a magazine that was really the Bible. And okay, we could advertise in the magazine, but what I needed, as I'd found out on the UK market, I needed a key to get into that market. People just don't look at your shoe and buy it. They need to be persuaded by something. They need to be influenced. And so we had to find the influence, and that would be finding a product, a shoe, making a shoe so that we could get a very good rating. Runner's World used to rate the shoes once a year. I think it was the August edition. And they used to rate them 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it was. But if you got number one, which would probably Nike or New Balance, you could never produce enough shoes because the demand was incredible. And so by the time you were just about there fulfilling the market, the next year come round and Runner's World were rating again. This only lasted for a couple of years because the retail trade were massively upset at this point where they weren't able to get the shoe that was rated. So they started to do star ratings, and they had 5-star, 4-star, 3-star. If you've got a 5-star rating, there could be in your category, it could be 3 or 4 5 stars. And that to me would be the key. And so we actually developed a shoe, and that was the Aztec, probably our best break into any market. And it did get a 5-star, and that opened the door, brought in Paul Fireman.
You had many setbacks over the years, some of which nearly ended the business. And yet you came back, found new markets, like making boots or running shoes for the trainers for the Norwegian army and all sorts of other things. Weren't you tempted at some point simply to give up?
Well, I think that being satisfied was where J. Edward Foster's had ended their days. Just being satisfied with what they had, something local. And I don't know, I think that it's a question that you don't give up, you persist. I don't know whether that's part of the DNA or whatever it is that you go into this thing and you know there's always an answer somewhere. There's always something you can do, something different. And So whilst we did nearly go out of business when our distributor, he went out of business, and that of course didn't help, but we got around the problem. Again, because we were dealing with athletes, we had a very hands-on relationship, and we were able to sell our shoes direct. We were not reliant upon the trade. We could go back to those athletes. So no, we never felt like we should give up. We always felt that there was a way to go and get through and to expand our business.
Yeah. I mean, your dedication to the business is clear, but did you find that you missed out on other parts of life? I mean, family life or anything, or were you able to manage that?
Well, I think this is one of those very tricky questions that are very difficult to answer. I don't really think that I missed out on that much life. And one must consider that this was a child of mine. Reebok was my family. And being the family, I had to look after Reebok. It's something that I had to do. You can't just, yes, many years I used to travel around on my own. Only in the later years people were traveling with me, including my wife. And she went to some very nice places, Monte Carlo for the tennis tournaments, and we had a good lot of fun. So maybe what she missed, the family might have missed in those early days, we possibly made up for in the later days. But I find it a difficult question to answer, because it does say, are you spending too much time just looking after a business? But like I say, Reebok was my family.
And how much of your success do you think was luck, and how much was sheer determination then? Because you did catch a number of trends, and as you say, with the Aztec and the aerobics trend in America, it seems you were lucky, but was it determination that's the important thing, or luck?
Well, I think you have to be determined. I think you've got to continue moving forward, but you can't do this without luck. And I think we had a lot of bad luck, but we had a lot of good luck. And I think you look at it, and you've got to be able to see the opportunities, because opportunities can just go by without you recognizing and notice that they're there. Plus, you have to make those opportunities happen. And if you're not willing to go that extra mile, take that extra trip, whatever it is, if you don't do that, you can miss those opportunities. And as you mentioned, aerobics was a fantastic one. We just happened to have the right people. And I think that being at the top of a company, it's not so much that you're doing all the work yourself. In fact, you probably end up not doing the work. What you end up doing is finding people who can do it better than you can do it, and having them do the work. Be there to help them. Be there that if they have a problem, they don't bring the problem to you. They bring answers. And if there's too many answers, you can decide which of those answers you could go with. So it has been, when we got into aerobics, we had Arnold Martinez. He was down there in Los Angeles, and his wife, Frankie, she was going to these aerobic classes. And Arnold thought this was a good idea. She was enjoying it so much, and so were her girlfriends, just exercising to music. And he went to one of the classes, so that the instructor was wearing a pair of running shoes. Half the class were also wearing running shoes. The rest, no shoes at all. He thought, wow, why don't we produce a shoe specially for these girls? And that's when Reebok, who'd been on the market with running shoes doing very nicely, thank you, but not over-recognized like Adidas and Nike, male, sweaty. No, Reebok was new, fresh, and all of a sudden it belonged to women. And that was something new and something original. And the women just loved it. When you've got people in Los Angeles, and we're talking about famous people putting these shoes on and teaching in those shoes, it suddenly became, well, magic. It just took off, and it took off with stars of Hollywood as well. They started wearing the shoes. And like we say in Monte Carlo, Wendell Niles, who was in Los Angeles, he was an impresario, And he used to bring a lot of people, maybe 20 or 30 stars over to Monte Carlo and bring in the tennis players. So you were mixing with a lot of people in those days, and they were all wearing the shoes, and that influenced the brand tremendously. But we had become a woman's brand.
Joe, I've made you speak for quite a long time, so I'm going to bring in Philip now, give you a little bit of a breather.
Okay.
Assuming Philip's online. There he is. Yes. Hello, Philip. And Philip, as I say, is the founder and chief of the Entrepreneurs Network. Philip, just tell us a little bit about the Entrepreneurs Network, what it is and what it does.
Absolutely. Well, I could have listened to that for a lot longer, to be honest, but I hopefully we'll get back to that soon. So the Entrepreneurs Network, we're a think tank. We started around, just like the Adam Smith Institute, we started around 7 years ago, actually within the Adam Smith Institute. And we exist to try and make the country better for entrepreneurs. So whether that's around things like tax or visas or regulation, we kind of effectively kind of lobby government to try and make that better for entrepreneurs. And one thing we do is we run something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Entrepreneurship. So part of our job is to update MPs and peers about what's happening in entrepreneurship and what our kind of members are saying. But we also do kind of more practical events as well. And this kind of ties into something like this, where you hear from someone who's been there and done it and knows exactly how to kind of grow and scale a business. And we don't know anything about these sorts of things, but we let them kind of talk to another room of entrepreneurs who want to kind of hear from someone like Joe and learn from them.
And you've got you have quite a large network now. I mean, hundreds, I presume, of entrepreneurs.
Well, it's we say thousands, so it's quite a loose network. So we say over 10,000. So we don't ask them to pay anything. So we try and get money from corporates to do that, and then so the entrepreneurs don't have to pay us as they're struggling, at least at the start of their business. And yeah, we do lots of events for them. We also kind of update them on policy. So when the government, as it's always doing, is changes a policy which impacts the business, we try to turn it into English and send it to them so they can kind of understand exactly this is how it's going to impact my business and what they need to do about it.
And what do they mostly complain about?
Depends on the business. So I'd say like the high growth side of it, it's often talent is the number one thing. So it's like, you know, that's the education system or bringing in people from other countries. And then at the start, it's investment. So I think until people have raised finance, then that's their number one concern. And there's lots of others as well, specific industry regulation that's holding back a particular sector or a particular type of business. But I'd say the big themes are definitely kind of talent and money.
Just to remind everybody watching, I'm here with Joe Foster, the founder of Reebok, and Philip Salter, the founder of the Entrepreneurs Network. And let me just say that if you'd like to put a question to either of my guests, do so now. You can do that online. You know how to do it. I don't need to tell you. So we'll try and get to as many of your questions as we can at the end. Joe, and maybe Philip might comment on this later. One striking thing in your book is how many people you thank. You've already talked, you mentioned that Reebok is, if you like, a family. Just how important are those people? I mean, how important is it to be part of a team rather than to try and...
My sound has gone off. This sound, I can't hear.
Sound problem, yeah, okay.
The sound went off. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly, yes.
The sound just came across
all right.
on the screen.
Well, it seems to be working for us now.
No,
you're fine. You should be fine.
I can't hear anybody. No. Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
But I can't hear from your end.
Have you got the mute button pressed?
It just came up and went. Chat pen.
I mean, did you want me to just answer that?
It just came on the screen as though
or no?
Yeah,
I've not clicked anything.
Okay, let's see if Joe can sort himself out. And as I said, Joe thanks a huge number of people in his book, and it's obvious that he, is part of that team. And I just wondered, how much of entrepreneurship is the single-minded entrepreneur, and how much is partnership and doing things with other people?
Hopefully Joe comes back and maybe the technician and the background can sort that. But I'd say from our side, I think what we see with entrepreneurs, especially as they become more successful, and Joe kind of intimated that before, is that they become, they employ people who can do the jobs, as he said, better, the specific parts of the jobs better than themselves. So they kind of end up taking a step back. And one thing we find is that actually at that stage, some business owners can feel a bit guilty about that, because they're doing less of the actual kind of grunt work as they would have done at the start, and kind of passing that on to other people. Obviously, Joe has a kind of healthy view on that, which I think is the way to think about it, is that you've done all the hard work, and I think it's good to be able to let other people do that at some point. In terms of how important it is for that success, obviously it's critical. No business can grow without other people. It's just impossible. No man is an island in that respect. But I think you shouldn't lose kind of track on how much leadership matters. There's a lot of research into leadership and how important it is, and how important management is. One of them just looks at the kind of productivity between certain plants. So exactly the same business, but run in often a manufacturing business, but run at different locations. And whoever's leading those particular plants, it makes a huge difference on the productivity. And it's the same with kind of all sorts of management surveys that are done, that shows that if you put in good management structure, then it leads to success. So it's both. It's vital, obviously, to have the right people around you. No one could build anything like that, but without the right leadership as well, I think it's impossible. But I'm sure Joe hopefully will have some practical kind of insights on that.
Oh, you're muted, Joe. You need to do your mute button at the bottom. Click that one. We can't hear you.
I wonder if you try taking off the headphones, maybe that might, unplugging them and just doing it like that, maybe that might solve the problem.
Yeah, now we can hear you, I think, can't we? Yeah, we're okay. Yeah.
Okay. Is the screen gone?
No, we've got it. I've got you. We can see you.
You can see me. I can't see you, but still, I can talk. I agree quite a lot with Philip there. That you need talent, and you also need that finance. But when it comes to people, you can't do it all yourself. It's impossible. So you have to take on people, and this is probably one of the most important skills of leadership, is to know when you need to take on people and take on the right people. And you've got to share a lot of things with those people. It's important to share your business with them. Otherwise, if they just feel they work for you, I don't think that's a good thing. I think they've got to be part of the family. And with a good team, you can continue building your business. And I think possibly a lot of people didn't know that I was the founder of Reebok for many years, because I thought it more important to step back and let other people become part of that brand, to be able to help them to grow your brand. I didn't go across to America, and America is where we built the brand. When I say I didn't go across, I didn't go and become part of the American team. That was Paul Fireman, and he was good, and he could build his team, and that helped tremendously. I stayed looking after the rest of the world. So I had the rest of the world, and Paul Fireman had America. The reason that it's better, it was no good me becoming part of that American scene. It was an American, he was doing a good job, and we had a very good agreement that if he just kept growing America, the rest of the world would be easy. And in fact, it was. The influence that America has, certainly in the sports industry, the influence they have on the rest of the world is incredible. I was going on distribution then around the world, and I didn't have to work very hard. It was a matter of following up inquiries. People wanted the brand. And you can only do that if you have a good team. But Philip did mention that one of the other problems in having good people is finance. And finance was absolutely fundamental to Reebok, being able to take that business from, in America, quoted in dollars, from $9 million to $30 million to, I think it was $90 million, then $300 million, and $900 million in successive years. I mean, that gives you, first of all, it gives you the finance problem. But luckily, we had Stephen Rubin, who was Pentland, is Pentland. and Stephen had a sourcing company out in the Far East. Having a sourcing company was good because Stephen gave the company a credit line. He had part of the company as well, but he gave it a credit line. That helped get over that initial problem of how do you finance it. Then the next problem, of course, was with the growth like that, how do you feed it? Where do you get your product from? And we were very fortunate here that Nike, in particular Nike, hit a very difficult time. And they were pulling out of factories in South Korea. At the same time, we were expanding. So we managed to get the production. But that's where the luck comes in. And without that luck, you've got to have it all together. And it takes teamwork, it takes financing, but it does take an awful lot of luck that you can get the timing right to be there. And that's what happened for Reebok.
Yeah. You're talking very much about building up relationships, building up networks with other people, with suppliers and distributors and indeed customers. You've had many failures and successes in doing that. Do you think, and again, maybe Philip has a comment, do you think that politicians and I suppose even economists overlook how important relationships and networks are, and in particular, how long they take to build up? I'm always thinking that in this current pandemic, politicians seem to think you can turn the economy on and off. Whereas the economy is really a huge network of relationships, and those take time. There's many years in some cases to build up, and they're not so easily replaced once you've destroyed them. So, I mean, do you agree that politicians don't really quite understand business and how it works and what a network arrangement it is?
Well, I'm interested in politics, but I'm not a politician. And I do agree that the problem is it's very easy to turn things off, but it's very much more difficult to turn them back on again. And that's a problem that, that we had with Reebok. The demand was such that it was overwhelming. And we could have taken an option of slowing things down. But as Paul Feynman said, he knew how to slow it down, but he wouldn't know how to start it again. And I think this is probably the problem with politicians, that the politician, yes, they don't realize that you've got to build a relationship. We built a relationship with the women, with the aerobics people, with all out there in America and globally eventually. But if you turn it off, you lose your customer. And to get it back again, it will be too difficult. Yes, I think relationships are very important, and I had many. And they worked very well. And I think politicians can make a sudden decision, which is fine. You can change things if you're a politician very quickly. But I'm with you, and that is that business doesn't work that way. Business is a series of building blocks and keeping them in place so that you can move forward and move upwards. Otherwise, you lose your business.
Does that strike a chord with your members, Philip?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just thinking about starting a think tank, I remember in the early days just wondering kind of how to be taken seriously. And I remember someone gave me some advice saying, just stay around long enough and then, you'll know everyone. And it's exactly like that. And I'm sure it's like that with every industry. Those sorts of relationships matter. Compared to the COVID thing, I think the kind of government does understand it to some degree. I mean, obviously doing it, the practice of doing it and the kind of theory of doing it is being tested heavily. But with COVID, the idea was to kind of put companies into stasis until it was over. And, obviously there's a limit to how far that can go in terms of funding or in terms of the economy changing, or just too much debt maybe for some people. But ultimately, I think that's the logic. I think they haven't always got this in all circumstances. So one thing I remember was they were looking at kind of trying to stop late payment. And one of the ideas, I think they've learned from it now, but one of the ideas a while ago was you kind of shop in your, someone that's paying you late. But obviously as a business owner, you don't do that because they're your customers. And, if you were to say, oh, no, this particular bank or this law firm isn't paying their bill, or whoever your customer is, then they're not going to do business with you ever again. So completely agree. Relationships are kind of absolutely critical, kind of vital to doing business, and very, very hard to build up and take years. It's why people stay in the same industry, and why if you've got experience in an industry and then you want to become an entrepreneur later in life, you're more likely to be successful because you already know people in your supply chain, and you have the expertise and all of the kind of networks that are just kind of invaluable and really can't be built overnight.
And another thing that interested me, Joe, was that you wrote in your book that what motivates you, or motivated you, was not so much winning, but the thrill of actually competing. And I know, a lot of very successful people who carry on doing deals night and day, even though they're perfectly comfortably well off. They don't need the money, they don't need the hassle. But there's seems to be something in their blood. Would you say that there's an entrepreneurial personality that you've either got or you haven't got, or is entrepreneurship something that you can learn somehow?
I think you can learn an awful lot, but I do think it's got to be in your DNA to begin with. I do think you've got to be a person that instead of seeing a problem, you see it as a possible way of improving things. You don't worry about that problem. You think, well, this has arrived. How can we get around it? And can we turn it into something good, an advantage? And we used to get, in a very simple way, athletes complaining that the socks were turning blue because they'd run across country in wet conditions, and they came back to it, and the wives have got these socks and their feet were turning blue. And I loved it when people would write me a letter about that, because my biggest fear was if they just didn't bother, if they just thought, oh, I'm not buying these again, throw it away. So somebody would come to me and complain, and we just say, well, unfortunately with this leather, we've been onto the tannery. The tannery said they didn't wash enough of the dye out afterwards, but here you are, here's half a dozen socks, and that's great. And those people started to work for you. They were willing enough to write to you, they were willing to complain. They also helped to build your company. So anytime when a problem comes along, whatever it is, it's worth looking at it and saying, well, can we change this? Adidas complained about our 2 stripes and a T-bar that we had originally. And we were delighted. We thought, oh, Adidas, they're recognizing us. They're worried about us already. They're worried about us. And right, so we didn't complain. We just changed our side markings to the arrow, which became significant as our brand. And it allowed us to put
there it is.
Window. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, these things, problems are not to be too big a worry. Problems you should look at. Okay, some can be worse than others. When a distributor went out of business, that was a bit difficult. But at least we looked to turn it around. So when it comes to saying, do you always remain looking at wanting to do business, wanting to do deals? I would say it's probably in your blood to want to be creative all the time, to want to keep going. We've just done a book. I've just done the book there. And I want that to be number 1. And I'm going to work hard at making sure it's number 1. It's not just to satisfy, just sit back and just let it sit. No, we're pushing it. And we're pushing it very well. And I think that's probably the DNA that says, no, you've got to sell this book.
Definitely. I mean, your members, Philip, I mean, they're sort of habitual problem solvers as well. Is that what keeps them going and motivates them?
Yeah, I mean, I think Joe really answered that question well, because, you know, he's going into the business and all the kind of the challenges that he's facing, and obviously talking about the book, you know, it's that constant thing of looking for improvement. I think there's a good quote, which is that anyone can be a great entrepreneur, but not everyone can be Steve Jobs, or obviously in this case, kind of Joe Foster. And I think that really is about right, that a great entrepreneur can come from anywhere, and but it's not everyone has got that. There's been some research into the kind of personality types. It's a little bit fluffy, but looks at trying to work out whether entrepreneurs are different to the general population. And a lot of it, there are kind of certain things that they suggest, but I think my kind of reading of the research is that there's still so much difference between different entrepreneurs. It's my experience of meeting entrepreneurs as well. Some are extroverts, some are introverts, some obviously quite kind of aggressive in the way they do business. Some of them are all about relationships and very kind of building bridges. So I don't think anyone, if there was a kind of a child looking at themselves thinking, have I got what it takes to be an entrepreneur? I'd say you can't tell from your personality as such. But I think the one thing that binds them together is obviously wanting to make their bit of the world better and change things for better. And I don't think, even though I think tax rates matter and things like that, I don't think ultimately they're driven by money. They're driven by wanting to change things and make the world better. And one kind of area that I find really interesting is this kind of nature versus nurture in terms of success. And there's been some work done on things like twin studies to look at whether people become more, you know, kind of due to what extent it is within their DNA. And I think with entrepreneurship, one thing that's quite interesting is that it doesn't seem to be the kind of correlations you'd get with the success of like winning the Nobel Prize or other things. So, and for me, that was really kind of quite inspirational, because it does show that, you know, it doesn't really matter that much kind of, you know, where you're born or who your parents are. Actually, it's more about kind of other things that are driving the success there, rather than just being particularly smart, which I presume you have to be to win the Nobel Prize of Physics or something like that. But entrepreneurs, they need so many different skills, and whether that's kind of tenacity or kind of all the other things that kind of someone like Joe kind of represents.
We've got a question in from somebody whose name I'm afraid I can't pronounce, but he's saying to Joe, would you do the shoe business in today's era, or would you explore other businesses? And if so, what would that be? Is the love towards your product or passion that drove you, or was it supply and demand? Was it the product because you really wanted to create the number one shoe, or was it you know, more about money and so on? So this question is in Seattle, Washington, by the way.
Right. Well, I think the thing that motivated me was the journey. I think it's the adventure, and that you can't take away from, because the adventures are good. The adventures are sometimes really bad, but you've just got to overcome the bad ones, and it really is the adventure of if you have something, you must know all about that. You must really know what your business is, and then you go for it. And if you're confident in your knowledge, and you're confident in what you can do, you will do it. And that became, for me, that was the reason for doing it. At the end, I could walk away from the business, because we'd grown that well that it became a numbers business. And I'd loved the journey. I'd enjoyed that journey. Now we're getting people in who are numbers people. You're getting reasons for doing this. And no longer could you sometimes run by the seat of your pants, which we had to at the time. We had to pick it up and run with it, whatever it was. And when you become that size, I was probably on an airplane going around the world twice a month. And you're met at every airport with a limousine. You're taken to the best hotels. You have some nice meals and nice conversations. And then you go back and you start again. And that wasn't the journey I'd been on. That had changed my journey. And other people were now sort of operating a business, more like a grocery business. How many packages do you want? How many of this? You've got to order in advance. When we come to talking about, you know, what drives you, what motivates you. Is it money? For me, no, it wasn't money. Money is a side product, which you have to have, and you do get. But it was the adventure. And we talk about what would I do today? It's all the virtual. Everything's gone virtual now. And COVID has moved that along tremendously fast. Yeah, so if you're in that business, that is a fantastic business. Yeah. Virtual shoemaking, I don't know, but it may well be. But it certainly, it certainly is in technology. Everything is moving with technology, and this is where the future is. Yes, we will always want shoes, but whether I would be in the shoe business now, I have no idea. I wouldn't know, but I think the business that I probably would attract me very much is the artificial intelligence. It's where it's going. It's robotics. It's moving in that direction. So that would probably get my imagination.
Is that a familiar story, Philip, that an entrepreneur starts a business and then it grows to a certain size and then they get kind of fed up with it?
I think people go through kind of love and hate with their businesses in general. So I think it's like, it's a cycle. I think rarely a business just stops because someone gives up. I suppose giving up and then the business failing is kind of part of it. But I think it's almost, I mean, obviously Joe's was a family business, that's different. But even starting a business, I think that business itself becomes, you know, like people describe it as being like their child and other things. So it's almost like it's very hard to give up. And even when people sell their businesses, they often, and for lots of money, they often feel quite bad about what's happening to their business afterwards as well. So it's quite, I mean, it's a really emotional thing. There's no, there's no kind of getting away from that. But yeah, I don't think the story of growing a business as big as Joe's is that familiar. So it's something where it's kind of very unique to a brand to grow to the point where, you know, pretty much everyone on the planet kind of recognizes it.
Here's a question from Luigi Amati. And he says, were there other entrepreneurs inside Reebok? Or did you have just good and maybe great managers? And how did you distinguish one from the other? And how did you motivate your managers or entrepreneurs, if there were entrepreneurs in the business?
I think there were a lot of entrepreneurs in the Reebok business, and many of them have gone on. Particularly, we look at Alan Martinez, who went on to be the CEO of UGG, and he grew that business tremendously well. Paul Fireman himself, he had very little money when he decided that he would like to be our distributor in the USA, and it took quite a lot of energy and effort to finance the business, and that financing did come, as I said, through Stephen Rubin, who, by the way, I sent a book. He read it. So I think that, yes, there's a combination of people who want to be part of your business and be an entrepreneur with you, or people who will go on to be entrepreneurs. But essentially, you have to build a team. You have to build people who are with you. And I think if you can build that team, they feel as though they own the business. They have to feel the passion that you feel for it. And it was brilliant to go to the many meetings we went to, and everybody, you could see they were sharing the passion. I think a lot of that was the success we had. The tremendous success in growth allowed people to belong to it. And that was important to me.
I wonder if I could just ask a quick question following up from that, Joe, which is around when people, you must have had people at the start of the business when it was smaller who didn't kind of grow with the business, and how you kind of managed people in that situation, whether letting them go or kind of motivating them to kind of step up, I suppose, for the kind of growth that you wanted to achieve.
Well, I think that when you have somebody working for you and it doesn't work, if you take people and it doesn't work, it is better to allow them to go somewhere else. I don't think, unless they're actually with you, I don't think you can change them. I think if it's okay, encourage everybody, encourage people. But if it's not working, it's better that you go different ways.
We've had a couple of questions about large businesses and how they communicate to the public and how they respond to political pressures. And we've seen a lot of companies who, over recent weeks and months and years, have been confronted with political protests over one thing or another, and have then advertised, or they've built in systems to deal with that. And in some cases, they've been perhaps jumped into that. And specifically when you get to things like clothing and footwear, there are concerns about ethical sourcing of materials and products. What's your feeling on that, both of you, as to how can firms make sure that they are acting ethically without sort of going over the top and just being bullied into doing things that maybe is bad business and is bad ethically in the long run?
Well, I think as you grow your business and you become more recognizable, once you have a duty. Once people know who you are, you have a duty, because you also know you will become a target. Probably the best one for me is Apartheid. We had a name, Reebok. Reebok is a South African animal. A lot of people thought we were a South African company. And it came from America, that are you doing business with South Africa? And at the time, yes, I was doing business with South Africa. And they said, well, you've got to stop. I said, okay, we'll stop, but somebody else will do that business for us. You'll find somebody else will transship, and they'll be doing it. And I suggested, wouldn't it be better if we stay doing our business, but we gave all our profits to, I think it was Save the Children or something like that. It was a fund which looked after the children in South Africa who were being, some of them were being put in jail. But I took the point when the guys came back to me and said, Joe, yes, you can do the business, but when you come to but, that will be it. You will not get beyond but to explain what you're doing. You just got to stop. So we stopped. And yes, we did get a lot of product transshipped into South Africa, but that was the price. And I think that when you are a global name, you just have a duty, and that duty is to work with the system.
Okay. Let me, we're very close to wrapping up. Let me put just one last question to you, and maybe Philip can tell us whether this is common or not. What was your biggest mistake? What is the thing that you most regret in your career?
Well, when you achieve more or less more than you've ever thought you could achieve, it's hard to say that you can regret anything. And for me, regrets are a waste of time. It's something that takes away the benefits of what you are doing. Regrets? No, I don't have any regrets, and I don't have a big one.
Philip, are you regretful about anything in common or not?
I think, well, that's a very healthy way to approach life, isn't it? I think I have more than enough regrets already. So yeah, I think it's interesting. So I think some entrepreneurs don't necessarily regret it, but they pay a big price for what they've done in terms of they've built a successful business, but they've paid the price, as we were talking earlier about, in terms of family, as you asked a question earlier. But I think it's obviously Joe's managed to find a way through that. I think that's all credit to him, but I don't think everyone does manage that, and they those things do disrupt their person, them in terms of their personal life. So that's something that comes up. But I think ultimately, they're doing what they're doing for a reason, because they get so fulfilled by building a business, and that's their life ambition often. So clearly they're voting with their feet in as much as that's what they prefer to do. So I mean, I think that's all power to them.
Friends, we're out of time, but let me thank everybody who sent in questions, and thank you for watching. You can, if you didn't catch it all, you can see it again on Facebook very shortly. And thanks to Joe, and thanks to Philip, and thanks to Matt Lesh, who's the Adam Smith technical bod, who's been making sure we run more or less okay. We've done okay from our end. And I suppose we should thank your own technical assistant, Joe.
Yes, indeed, I think we need to. Yes.
And let me just remind you that Joe's book, Shoemaker, is now out and available, and a right riveting read it is. And we need to make it #1. So thank you all very much. Thank you in particular, Joe, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. It's been good, Ed.